Chapter 1. The visitor from Belgium, you are quite certain the phone rang. Mrs. Lonsdale, the housekeeper's hands, folded tightly in her lap, twitched at the question. I may be going dotty, sir, but I knows what I heard. Hercule Poirot inclined his head politely. Oui, madam. I do not doubt your honesty. It is merely that a phone which has no connection should not ring, unless, of course, it has a reason to lie. Colonel Wexley, seated by the fireplace with a frown on his face, interjected. It's not the sort of thing you'd expect here. Poirot, George Halversham was peculiar, yes. But murder? I dare say the inspector believes it was a heart attack. Poirot gave a small smile, the corners of his moustache rising just so. Ah, but the details, less details, Colonel. They matter. A locked study. A telephone that rings without life. A man found dead with the receiver still warm to the touch. You will forgive me if I do not accept coincidence. The Colonel shifted uneasily. Graves isn't too pleased with your involvement. I must say. C'est la guerre, Poirot replied, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. I shall pay my respects to the good inspector shortly, but first I should like to see the room. Mrs. Lonsdale, if you please. She nodded and led them out with shuffling steps, her manner nervous. Poirot followed closely, noting how her eyes flicked toward shadows, her ears twitching at every creak of floorboard. When they reached the late Halversham's study, the door stood ajar, a jagged splinter of wood where the constable had forced it open that morning. Poirot paused at the threshold. No one has touched anything, he asked. Only Graves. Sir, said Mrs. Lonsdale. He looked about and said it were natural causes. Said the poor man must have fallen back and knocked the receiver loose himself. But I know what I heard. Poirot stepped inside without replying. The room was square and rather cold, the air holding that peculiar stillness that follows recent death. A book lay open on the desk. The disconnected rotary phone, black, worn, familiar, sat by the man's right hand. Its receiver rested beside it. A grey smudge marred the cradle, where it would usually sit. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The phone has not been wiped, he murmured. Yet the smudge is fresh, not consistent with dust patterns around it. Curious, he turned to Mrs. Lonsdale. What time did you first hear the ringing? She blinked. It were just past 8. I'd been in the kitchen, putting the kettle on, and I heard it plain. Rang 3 times. Then stopped. I came up and knocked, but nothing. I feared, yes, and no one entered after you. She shook her head. I was alone. Teddy came. Later, Poirot's eyebrows rose. Monsieur Teddy, his son, writer of some sort. He's upstairs still, I think. Didn't take the news well. Poirot considered this, then moved to the bookshelf. His hand hovered a moment before plucking out a worn volume, titled Signal Theory in Modern Communications. He flipped through it slowly, stopping at a page that had been deliberately dog-eared. A diagram caught his eye, an illustration of how to wire a phone's internal bell to an external signal using batteries. He said nothing, but his mustache twitched ever so slightly. From behind, Colonel Wexley cleared his throat. Poirot, do you think, I think, mon ami, that someone wished to create an effect. The ringing phone, it was no accident, no illusion. It was theatre. He closed the book and returned it precisely to its shelf. This was not a death by chance. This was staged. Colonel Wexley scratched his chin. Well, if someone did kill him, how the devil did they get out? Windows barred. Door was locked from the inside. Inspector Graves says it's physically impossible. Ah, but he assumes one thing, Poirot said mildly, that the ringing and the death occurred together. What if the ringing came later? Mrs. Lonsdale gave a soft gasp. You mean he was already dead? Possibly, Poirot replied, and someone wished to distract from that fact. He moved to the study window, ran a gloved finger along the latch, and then brought it to his nose. Oiled recently, he murmured. Curious, Nest's pause. A man who never opened this window, why oil the latch? Draught, maybe, the colonel suggested. Or preparation, Poirot said softly, to move without sound. He turned back, surveying the room once more. Colonel, I should like to speak to Monsieur Teddy next, alone, if possible. Colonel Wexley gave a slow nod. I'll ask him to come down. As the two men exited, Mrs. Lonsdale remained behind, staring at the disconnected phone on the desk. Her lips moved silently, as if repeating something only she could hear. Poirot, at the bottom of the stairs, paused. The phone, he murmured. It rang when it should not have. That is not merely a question of mechanics, Colonel. It is a question of will. The colonel raised an eyebrow. You think someone wanted it to ring? Poirot smiled faintly. No, mon ami. I think someone needed it to ring. Just then, the faint creak of a stair above caught their attention. A slow tread. Poirot glanced up as Teddy Halversham descended, eyes red-rimmed, face taut. You wanted to speak to me? He asked. Poirot nodded. Indeed, monsieur. There are matters that require clarification. About your father, about the will, and perhaps, his voice light, but firm, about what you heard, or did not hear, this morning. Teddy's jaw tightened. I've nothing to hide. Bean, said Poirot, gesturing toward the drawing room. Then let us begin. Chapter 2. The room that shouldn't ring. I suppose you think I did it, Teddy Halversham said as he stepped into the drawing room, his arms folded tightly across his chest. Poirot studied him a moment before responding. Mon cher monsieur, I think. Only that it is best to begin with facts. Teddy gave a short laugh, bitter, humorless. Well, I didn't kill him, if that's what you want to hear. Poirot sat in a high-backed chair and motioned for Teddy to do the same. You and your father. You did not get along, no. One did, Teddy replied flatly. But yes, especially me. Poirot tilted his head slightly. You are a writer, I believe. Trying to be. Teddy's voice bristled with resentment. He never let me forget how much of a disappointment I was. Every time I saw him, he had something to say about wasted potential. Yet you lived, here still, not by choice. I came back last month when my flat in London became too expensive. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd help. But he made it clear I was a nuisance. Did your father speak of changing his will? There was a slight pause. He said He might, Teddy replied, eyes flickering. Said he'd had enough of paying for failure. That was the last conversation we had. When was that? 3 days ago. Poirot's fingers tapped the armrest gently. And this morning? When did you come down? Around 8:30. Mrs. Lonsdale had already called the police. She was in a state, said she heard the phone ring and then silence. I ran up, saw the door was locked. It all happened fast. You tried to open the door. I did. Then Graves arrived and forced it open. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Did you hear the phone ring yourself? Teddy blinked. No. I don't think so. I wasn't near enough. Poirot nodded slowly. And the will, monsieur? You have not seen a recent copy. Why would I? He kept everything locked. Away. Probably burned it out of spite. Poirot offered no reaction. He merely studied the young man's face for a long moment. Teddy shifted uncomfortably. Is that all? For now. Teddy stood abruptly and left without another word. Poirot waited a beat, then rose and made his way back toward the study. Colonel Wexley met him in the hallway. Well, the colonel asked, impressionable, frustrated, but not, I think, a murderer, Poirot said. His story matches the time Mrs. Lonsdale gave. But there are gaps. There is a question, always who. Stood to gain. He re-entered the study, letting the stillness settle around him like a shawl. This time, he examined the desk more carefully. The blotter showed faint marks, what might have been the indentation of handwriting, though the paper itself was gone. He lifted the phone receiver once again and turned it over, noting a slight looseness in the base. He sat down, unscrewed the base plate, and peered inside. Ah, he murmured. The compartment was hollowed slightly deeper than expected recently, judging by the light scratch marks along the inner casing. It could easily conceal a folded document, but now it was empty. Replacing the plate, he stood and examined the bookshelves again. One shelf was more dust-covered than the others, except for a single space clearly recently filled and then removed. He checked nearby titles. Electrical systems, mechanical clocks, signal bells. Someone had studied these. He moved to the window, ran his hand along the bars. Fixed, but narrow enough to slip a hand through, especially if one knew what they were doing. His gaze dropped to the floor. A faint scuff mark, barely visible, traced away from the sill. Poirot crouched to inspect it. Mon Dieu, he muttered. There was movement from outside to in. Footsteps in the hallway broke his concentration. Inspector Graves entered, arms crossed, brow furrowed. I see you've made yourself quite at home, Graves said coolly. Poirot stood. Forgive me, Inspector. I act only in pursuit of clarity. The post-mortem confirms heart failure. Sudden, no signs of a struggle. If you ask me, this is just a very odd coincidence. A phone that rings though disconnected, a will that vanishes, a latch freshly oiled. You are a man of facts, monsieur. So am I. Graves sighed. What are you suggesting, Poirot? That someone staged it. For what purpose? That I do. Not yet, no, Poirot replied. But I would very much like to see Mr. Halversham's complete will records. and to speak with the other visitors to this house recently. Graves folded his arms. You've already spoke. He spoke. To the son. Who else do you think is involved? Poirot's voice was calm, almost absent. There is Lydia Maythorne, the antique dealer. She had business with the deceased. Graves raised an eyebrow. That woman, I can't see her killing anyone. Sharp-tongued. Yes, but murderous. Many people are underestimated, Inspector. Poirot said softly, especially those who rely on precision and timing for their trade. Graves exhaled through his nose. Fine, speak to her if you must, but don't stir up the village. Not unless you find something concrete. Poirot inclined his head, naturally. As the inspector left, Poirot remained still for a moment. Then he turned once more to the study phone and lifted it to his ear. Silence. Dead. Yet this morning. It had rung. 3 times. He set it down slowly, then walked to the window. The wind had picked up. Beyond the bars, across the garden, the hedge trembled slightly. Poirot's gaze lingered there. Thoughtful. Then he stepped back and said, very quietly, the room is silent now. But someone wanted to wake the dead. Chapter 3. The bitter son. Poirot found Teddy Halversham alone in the parlour, seated by the window with an untouched cup of tea growing cold beside him. His back was stiff, and the fingers of his right hand tapped ceaselessly against the armrest. Poirot did not speak immediately. He took the armchair opposite and folded his hands in his lap. You said your father threatened to change the will. He began gently. Teddy gave a short, humorless laugh. He didn't threaten, Monsieur Poirot. He declared it. Said I'd get nothing more from him until I became a man worth investing in. Poirot tilted his head. And you did not ask him to reconsider? I did, Teddy said through gritted teeth. I told him I was working on something new, novel. Better structure, better characters. He didn't care. He said writing was a hobby for people with talent, not a life raft for the lazy. Poirot observed him quietly. So you feared you would be cut off? I knew I would be, Teddy replied. That's why I was still here. I needed to convince him. Needed time, forgive me, Poirot said mildly. But I must ask, were you aware of any previous versions of your father's will? Teddy's eyes narrowed. Only that there was one. I assumed I was in it. I mean, he was still my father. Yet the will cannot be found. Maybe he destroyed it. Teddy muttered. He liked power games. This house, that locked study, it was all about control. Even in death, Poirot leaned back slightly. Do you recall seeing anyone else visit your father in the days before his death? Just Lydia. Came by the day before. They argued about something. I heard raised voices through the floor. Did you listen? Teddy shrugged. Not intentionally. But this place, the walls aren't exactly thick. She said something about a phone. He said, you shouldn't have lied to me. She stormed out after that. Poirot's brow furrowed. You've told no one this. I didn't think it mattered, Teddy said. Tone defensive. She's harmless, isn't she? That remains to be seen. Poirot rose slowly and walked toward the fireplace. His gaze drifted across the mantelpiece photographs of a younger Teddy, a woman presumed to be the late Mrs. Halversham, and George himself. unsmiling. He noticed a matchbox lying slightly askew behind a porcelain clock. He opened it, empty. "You smoke, monsieur?" "No," Teddy replied, startled. "I mean I used to, but I quit months ago." Yet I noticed the faint scent of cigar smoke in the study. "Your father did not smoke either, non?" Teddy hesitated. "No, he quit years ago. Doctor's orders." Poirot replaced the matchbox and turned. "Then someone else has smoked there recently." Teddy's expression darkened. "You think someone came in and staged all this maid?" The phone ring tampered with the scene. Poirot gave a small nod. "It is a possibility I consider most seriously." Teddy leaned forward suddenly, his voice low. "Do you think it was Lydia?" Poirot paused. "She had cause, non, and knowledge. She deals in items that rely on precision, electronics. And your father, it seems, was aware of a certain misrepresentation." "Then she had more to lose than I did," Teddy muttered. "Perhaps," Poirot said gently. "But motives are not solutions, monsieur. They are doors. One must still know what lies behind them." Teddy stood abruptly. "I don't know what else I can give you." "Only the truth," Poirot replied, "even in fragments." There was silence between them. Strained, Poirot picked up the photograph of George Halversham and studied the man's face. Sharp cheekbones, calculating eyes. A faint twist to the mouth, not a warm figure. "You said he never let you forget your failings." Teddy exhaled. "He told me once that failure was contagious, that I'd inherited it from my mother. She died before I could remember her, and yet he made her part of his every insult." Poirot gave a slight nod, then turned toward the door. "Merci, monsieur. I do not believe you killed your father, but I believe you feared you would be blamed." Teddy said nothing. Poirot paused. "If you recall anything more, no matter how small, come to me directly." Teddy gave a tight nod, and Poirot left him there, standing by the cold tea and the colder view of the garden. Downstairs, Colonel Wexley waited in the front hall, hands in his pockets. "Well, he is bitter, yes, wounded, certainly, but he is not cruel," Poirot murmured. "Not clever enough, perhaps, to arrange such theatrics as I suspect were employed." "Then who?" Poirot glanced upward, where the corridor narrowed into shadows. "Someone who feared exposure," he said softly. "Someone who wished to ring a bell where there should be silence." He turned toward the door. "I must speak with Madame Maythorne." The colonel raised an eyebrow. "You think she's involved? She sells stories for profit, not novels. But antiques, and sometimes stories, are what people most wish to protect or hide." As Poirot stepped out into the pale light, the breeze carried a low rustle through the hedges behind him. The study remained locked, silent. But Poirot had begun to hear something else. Not the sound of a phone, but of a lie ringing clear beneath every conversation. Chapter 4. The antique dealer's Lydia Maythorne's antique shop was tucked at the end of the village lane. Its painted sign faded, its windows cluttered with curiosities, brass clocks, telephone handsets, ivory letter openers. Poirot stood outside a moment, inspecting the glass panes. A replica of a late 1800s field telephone sat at the center, its mouthpiece gleaming faintly in the weak daylight. He stepped inside. A brass bell above the door gave a soft chime. Lydia appeared from behind a tall cabinet. Sleeves rolled to her elbows. Wire-rimmed spectacles perched halfway down her nose. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, clearly not surprised. "You're investigating George's death, I presume." "I am here, madam, merely to ask a few questions." "Your name was mentioned." "I'm sure it was." She pulled off her spectacles and placed them on the counter. "Teddy's always been good at spreading blame." Poirot smiled faintly. "Monsieur Halversham stated only that. You and his father had words recently." She turned away, lifting a small wooden drawer from a display case. "George and I always had words. He enjoyed provoking people. It was how he measured power." "What of it? You visited him the day before his death." "I did," she said. "Don't even." "We discussed a recent transaction, a minor dispute, over authenticity, nothing unusual in our line of work." "And the nature of the item in question?" Lydia hesitated, then replaced the drawer with care. "A rotary phone. He sold it to me as wartime issue. I sold it to the Eastwood Museum for a tidy sum. They later found it had reproduction parts. George claimed innocence implied I was to blame." "And were you?" She turned, sharp-eyed. "Now, does it matter? George threatened to report me. I said he wouldn't dare. That was all. We shouted. Then I left." Poirot stepped closer to a display shelf. "I noticed your shop features many refurbished communication devices. I specialize in restoration, antique radios, clocks, phones. The craftsmanship fascinates me." "Indeed," said Poirot. He pointed to a coil of copper wire and a set of insulated pliers on a nearby bench. "These are not tools of display. They are tools of manipulation, madam." She laughed once, dry. "Are you suggesting I killed George over an argument about an old phone?" "I suggest nothing. I ask questions." Her smile faded. "George was a petty man with petty threats. He made enemies of everyone who ever trusted him. But I don't kill over business, Monsieur Poirot. I resolve my problems, like any other tradesperson with negotiation." "Yet your fingerprints were found inside the phone casing in his study." There was a pause. "I sold him that unit myself 2 years ago," she replied coolly. "Perhaps I handled it when it arrived. Perhaps he tinkered with it and forgot. Who keeps track of fingerprints after that long?" Poirot gave a slight shrug. "Curious, none? That the very phone your dispute involved, the very one used in this strange death." "There's your touch." Lydia leaned forward, eyes sharp. "And yet, I didn't lock the door from the inside. I didn't vanish a will. I didn't make the phone ring." Poirot lifted a brow. "You assume it rang, for the first time." A flicker of something unease crossed her expression. "Mrs. Lonsdale heard it. But she is, as I'm told, rather hard of hearing. Easily confused. What if the phone did not ring at all?" Lydia tilted her head. "Are you suggesting she imagined it, or—" Poirot said softly that someone ensured she heard exactly what they wanted her to. She said nothing. Poirot gestured toward a box of assorted dials. "You possess the tools, the knowledge, George had threatened to expose you, and someone, madam, went to great lengths to create an illusion. She laughed again. Though this time it came out flat. If I wanted to frighten George, I'd have filed a suit. I wouldn't have staged a ghost story. Yet fear, Poirot murmured, makes us act in ways we later deny. It is not the grand gesture, madam, but the clever lie that leaves the strongest trail. She crossed her arms. Do you have proof of anything? Or are we trading insinuations all afternoon? Poirot gave a gentle nod. Only one final question. Do you possess a battery pack or small timing mechanism that could be used to trigger an object, say a phone bell at a delayed time? Her eyes narrowed. I sell antique clocks. Of course I do. But a device removed from a timepiece, perhaps, or crafted for another purpose, I sell to hobbyists, restorers, and collectors. If someone wanted to rig a bell, they'd have better luck down at the motor shop in Ripley. Poirot stepped back, smoothing his coat. Merci, madam. I may return. I'll be here, she said coldly. Unlike George, as Poirot left the shop, the bell above the door gave another soft chime. Outside, the breeze lifted. Across the lane, a window shutter slammed against brick. Poirot paused, his hand in his pocket, the image of the phone still vivid in his mind. He pulled out a small notebook and jotted a single line. Fingerprints inside casing. False phone. Time delusion. Then, without another glance behind, he made his way back toward the Halversham house. There was one person he had yet to confront, and that person had confessed not guilt, but fear. Chapter 5. The vicar's Kiltreverend Lionel Carruthers opened the door of the vicarage with a look that landed somewhere between reluctance and weariness. His cassock hung unevenly on his thin frame, and the lines on his face had deepened since Poirot had first seen him. During George Halversham's funeral. I suppose you're here about George, he said without ceremony. May I come in, monsieur? Poirot asked mildly. Carruthers hesitated a moment, then stepped aside. I've just made tea. It's gone lukewarm, but you're welcome to it. They entered a modest drawing room, sparsely decorated. On the mantel stood a single photograph Carruthers, many years younger, beside a woman who bore a resemblance to the late Mrs. Halversham. Poirot noted it with quiet interest. Carruthers poured two cups and handed one to Poirot with an unsteady hand. Then he sat opposite and stared into his drink. I should tell you now, he said. I visited George the night before he died. Poirot gave a small nod. This has not been mentioned to Inspector Graves. No, Carruthers admitted, because I feared how it would look. I was angry. More than that, I was desperate. Desperate for what, monsieur? Carruthers looked up. To silence him, Poirot said nothing, allowing the pause to stretch. Carruthers exhaled heavily. George and I, we had history years ago, before I took the collar. There was a matter involving church funds, misplaced accounts. I was young, foolish. George helped correct the records quietly, but he never let me forget it. And last week, he told me he'd found some of the old ledgers again, threatened to make them public. Why now? Poirot asked gently. Because he wanted something. Favor from the council. Land access, I believe. He said I owed him, that if I didn't deliver, he'd ruin me, my congregation, everything. And so, you visited him? I did. I begged him to let it go. He enjoyed watching me squirm. He said he'd think about it. That was his way, dangling threats like bait. I left around 10. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. And he was alive when you left. Carruthers flinched. He was seated at his desk, alive, smirking, and full of venom. Did you touch anything? Go near the telephone? No. Carruthers shook his head. He wouldn't even let me sit down. Just stood there, berating me like a schoolmaster. Did you see anyone else near the house when you arrived or departed? No, Carruthers said slowly. Though, now that you ask, as I was walking down the garden path, I thought I heard something from the hedgerow. Movement. But I assumed it was an animal. Could you tell what direction it came from? Toward the eastern side of the house, near the study window. Poirot sat back. And you did not investigate. It was late. I was ashamed. I just wanted to get home. Poirot nodded slowly. And since then, you have remained silent. Carruthers lowered his head. I was afraid, not just of being blamed, but of what people would think. The vicar, blackmailed by the village miser. It would destroy everything. Do you believe George Halversham was murdered? Carruthers looked up sharply. Yes, I do now. It wasn't just his heart. He enjoyed fear too much. Someone finally returned the favor. Poirot sipped his tea. Letting the silence settle, then he asked, Did you notice the phone ring that evening? Or anything unusual in the room? Carruthers furrowed his brow. No ringing, just his voice. And the ticking of that awful wall clock. Always a second too fast. Poirot smiled faintly. Time, monsieur, always has something to say. Carruthers gave a hollow laugh. So you don't think I did it? No, Poirot replied. You are a man tormented by shame, not hate. And you lack the technical finesse this crime required. He stood, placing his untouched teacup gently on the table. I thank you for your honesty. Carruthers followed him to the door. You think it was Lydia? Poirot paused. Lydia had cause. She had knowledge. But knowledge, monsieur, does not always mean guilt. Others also had things to hide. Carruthers glanced away. Then you'd best uncover them quickly. The longer truth hides, the harder it is to bring it into the light. Poirot stepped into the fading afternoon sun. Then let us not waste time in shadow. As he walked back toward the Halversham estate, he reviewed the timeline once more. Carruthers had visited at 10. The body was discovered around 8 in the morning. The phone rang reportedly just before 8. But the room had been locked, unless someone had returned or never truly left. He stopped near the hedgerow that ran along the east side of the house. Kneeling briefly, he examined the ground. The grass had been disturbed, recently flattened in a narrow path, then shifted again. By the wind, he glanced up at the study window, barred, but the lower edge, just within reach, showed faint marks, a trail of oil. Nearly faded, Poirot stood. So far, he had a vanished will, a phone that should not ring, a lie wrapped in a trade dispute, and now a man who confessed to threats but not murder. Yet no one claimed to have seen the study window open, and still, someone had passed through Dot as he reached the house. Inspector Graves was waiting near the gate, arms folded. "Well?" Graves asked. "The vicar confess?" Poirot shook his head. "He confessed to fear, not violence." Same as the rest of them, Graves muttered, "This whole village is a kettle ready to boil." Poirot's eyes narrowed, and the steam. Inspector will it rise quietly or whistle? Graves gave him a sideways look. "You've something, haven't you?" "Not yet," Poirot replied. "But someone is lying. And lies, monsieur, always have fingerprints." Graves raised a brow. "And where do you plan to look next?" Poirot turned toward the high street, at the source of the noise. Chapter 6. A phone that cannot ring. Halversham's study had grown colder by the hour. Though the weather had not changed, it was a chill born not of climate, but of vacancy, a room emptied of its inhabitant, but not its secrets. Poirot closed the door behind him and crossed to the desk with quiet purpose. He did not rush. Precision mattered. He had returned not to observe, but to dismantle a lie. He sat in George Halversham's old chair, the leather creaking faintly beneath his weight. The disconnected phone sat before him, dull black and immobile. To anyone else, it was simply an object, useless, mute. To Poirot, it was the central performer in an elaborate play. He opened his valise and removed a compact toolkit. With care, he unscrewed the phone's baseplate once more and examined the wiring. What he had seen before now required confirmation. The original wires had been clipped cleanly, deliberately. This phone had not been connected to the mains or any internal line in quite some time, and yet Mrs. Lonsdale had sworn it rang. A small copper coil was nestled inside the base, alongside what appeared to be a homemade triggering mechanism. Two tightly wound springs and a fragment of a battery housing. Poirot lifted it gently with tweezers. "Not standard," he murmured. "A time-delayed bell mechanism. Modified. Likely rigged to emit a short-ring cycle before exhausting the charge." He turned the casing over and examined the dust pattern again. The base of the phone showed smudges. New. Recent. The fingertips of someone who had opened it, set the device, and closed it again, all within a short time frame. Lydia Maythorne had handled the phone in the past. Yes, but someone else had touched it in the last day or two. He dusted the inside of the case with a fine graphite brush. A partial thumbprint revealed itself, smudged but intact. Poirot smiled faintly. Not the hands of time, but the hands of guilt. He jotted a note into his small black book. Homemade ringing device. Timed trigger. Phone incapable of external signal. No illusion. It was made to ring. Deliberately, he closed the phone and replaced it, then turned to the small shelf. Above the desk, on it were 5 books on signal engineering, titles he had seen before. But now he noted the dust layering more closely. One space was cleaner than the rest, and beside it was a small notch in the edge of the shelf, wood compressed recently. He pressed lightly on the back of the shelf. A faint click. A panel swung open, a narrow cavity behind the shelf, empty save for a single object wrapped in brown paper. Poirot retrieved it and peeled the wrapping away with delicate fingers. Inside was a folded document. He opened it carefully. Last will and testament of George Halversham. Poirot scanned the lines. Quickly. The will was dated just 1 week prior. It left the majority of George's estate not to Teddy but to the Church Restoration Fund, under the stewardship of Reverend Carruthers. Lydia Maythorne was to receive a specific sum to settle a debt of honesty, and Mrs. Lonsdale was gifted the cottage she lived in. Teddy was not named at all. Poirot folded the document with a slow breath. He whispered. Motives do not shout, but they do speak. He returned the will to his coat pocket and stood, pausing to glance once more at the room. Then he locked the study behind him and descended the stairs, where Mrs. Lonsdale hovered uncertainly at the base. "You've been in there a long while, Mr. Poirot." Poirot offered a kind smile. "The room, madam, has much to say when one listens closely." She nodded, wringing her hands. "I keep thinking of that phone. How it startled me. I still hear it, sometimes, echoing." "Madam," Poirot said gently, "you are quite certain it rang 3 times, clear as a bell, and it had never rung before, never. Not once since Mr. Halversham had it moved from the hall. Said he wanted peace while working." Poirot's eyes softened. "And yet, on the very morning he was found, it did." "Yes," she said, voice low, "it did." He gave a small bow. "Thank you, madam. Your ears, though weary, are most reliable." As he stepped outside, Colonel Wexley approached from the gate, his face tight. "I've just come from Lydia's shop," the colonel said quietly. "She's gone." "Gone?" Packed up suddenly, left a note on the door. Said she'd be away on urgent business and not to expect her back until next week. Poirot's mustache twitched. An inconvenient coincidence. None? Graves says she's making herself look guilty. She has cause, perhaps, but she did not conceal the will. Wexley frowned. "You found it." Poirot said softly, "hidden in the study behind a false panel. A clever hiding place, but not clever enough." "And Teddy?" the colonel asked. Poirot looked toward the house. "There is more to learn from Monsieur Teddy, and from the past. We are not at the end, Colonel. We are only now brushing the veil aside." He pulled his coat tighter round him. The wind had picked up again. "Someone," he murmured, "rang a bell not to wake the house but to mislead it." Wexley looked at him askance. "You mean the ringing wasn't a message?" Poirot's eyes glinted. "No, mon ami. It was a misdirection." Chapter 7. The locked study. It was early evening when Poirot returned to the Halversham house for the 3rd time that day. The light was thinning, filtering through the hallway windows in long, golden streaks that softened the air but did not warm it. He passed Mrs. Lonsdale with a nod. She said nothing, only glanced at the study door as if it might ring again on its own. Inside the study, Poirot moved with deliberate steps. This time, he brought a measuring tape, a magnifying glass, and a candle stub. He set them down on the desk, then walked to the door and closed it softly behind him. Locked from the inside, that they had all agreed upon. The brass bolt had been slid home when the door was broken open, the key still in the lock on the interior side. But how could a murderer stage such a thing? Unless the door had been bolted from outside after the fact. Poirot turned the handle once more, then examined the bolt mechanism. Old, but smooth. Recently oiled, just like the window latch. He took out his magnifying glass and peered at the tiny screws in the metal plate. One had the faintest nick along the edge. Poirot turned slowly toward the window. The bars outside were solid, yes, but a slender hand might reach through, perhaps not far, but just enough. If the bolt were loosened beforehand, he walked back to the desk and took the candle stub. He lit it, held the flame near the bolt, and waited. A faint sheen glistened. Vaseline. He said softly, or machine oil. Someone prepared this bolt to slide with little effort. He reached into his valise and removed a length of thin wire. He stepped outside, closed the door behind him, and began feeding the wire beneath the gap between the floor and the bottom edge of the door. Inside, he could still see the bolt's position through the glass pane above Dot with gentle movement. He twisted the wire upward, catching it against the base of the bolt's knob. He jiggled it lightly, then pressed forward. Click. The bolt slid shut. He opened the door and retrieved the wire. So, he whispered, it could have been done from outside, provided the bolt was oiled and the murderer was prepared. He turned toward the desk. On its surface sat the now reassembled phone, the modified bell mechanism hidden within, timed to ring after the murderer had gone. He sat, opened his notebook, and began reconstructing the final timeline. 10 p.m. Reverend Carruthers visits George Halversham. Leaves after being threatened. 10:15 to 11 p.m. Unknown figure re-enters or remains in the study. Sets the phone's timed device. Oils the door bolt. Possibly hides the will. 11:30 p.m. George Halversham dies, likely of a heart condition, exacerbated by a shock or sudden distress. 8 a.m. The phone rings. Mrs. Lonsdale hears it. The door is locked. George is found dead. But who had access to the room in that silent window? He had ruled out Carruthers too shaken to open. Lydia Maythorne was clever enough, had the technical skills, and had argued with George. But she had left town, and that, Poirot reflected, was precisely the problem. Only someone with guilt would flee, or someone afraid of being framed. He stood and crossed to the bookcase again. A trail of dust led down the right edge, not from frequent use, but one recent movement. The hidden compartment had been disturbed only once. No fingerprints on the outer surface. Someone had worn gloves, but not when opening the phone. He opened his notebook again and underlined the last entry. Partial thumbprint. Left-handed. Teddy Halversham was left-handed. Poirot had seen it when the young man signed his name on a condolence register. The morning of the funeral. He had a motive cut out of the will. He had opportunity living under the same roof. He had knowledge of his father's routines, his tempers, and, perhaps, the location of the original will. And yet Poirot hesitated. Teddy had been volatile, yes, but anxious, defensive, not calculating, not cold. The murder had required planning. Timing, technical preparation. Poirot looked again at the locked window. Someone who knew how to make a mechanism ring without wires. Someone who could oil a bolt without leaving a mark. Someone who wanted to cause a stir, not just a death. To ring a phone to frighten, to delay discovery. To lock the study and hide the will. Lydia. But why had the will benefited her? Unless she had found it and panicked. Poirot turned, then froze. The fireplace, unlit for days. He crouched and examined the grate. Ash. He reached in, pulled out a fragment of scorched paper. The ink had run, but a single line remained. My son, Edward Halversham, bequeath. Poirot's breath slowed. So there had been two wills. One naming Teddy. One replacing him. And someone had tried to destroy the earlier one but failed to burn it entirely. His eyes narrowed. Lydia had no reason to burn the original. But someone else did. Someone who had seen the new will. Someone who stood to lose everything. And who may have thought, for a time, that the original had been replaced, not merely hidden. Poirot rose slowly, fingers brushing ash from his sleeves. Then he walked to the door. There was one more person he needed to question. And this time, he would not accept silence. Chapter 8. Ashes of the wilted Halversham stood by the parlour window when Poirot entered, staring out at the rose bushes his mother had once tended. He didn't turn as the door clicked shut behind him. "You're persistent, Monsieur Poirot," he said quietly. "I half expected you'd be back." "I am most persistent, Monsieur," Poirot replied, "especially when a question refuses to sit still." Teddy gave a short, humorless laugh. "And what question is that?" Poirot stepped further into the room. Why would someone burn a will that benefited them? Teddy turned now, brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Poirot reached into his coat and withdrew the scorched fragment he had found in the grate. "Part of your father's earlier will. It named you as the primary beneficiary." Teddy stared at the blackened edge of the paper, then met Poirot's gaze. "I never saw that before." "None. It was found in the fireplace, in your father's study. Burned poorly, I might add." He said nothing. Poirot continued, his voice even. "There are two wills, Monsieur. The original which you would have inherited from, and the second, recently rewritten, which excludes you entirely. That one was hidden behind the bookcase, very deliberately." Teddy's jaw clenched. "So someone wanted to keep me out. Someone wanted to erase the past," Poirot said softly, "and thought burning the earlier will would be enough." Teddy crossed to the armchair, but didn't sit. "I didn't know about the second will." "No?" Poirot asked, watching him closely. "No." The reply came sharp now, defensive. "My father never told me anything. I assumed foolishly. I admit that I was still in his plans. But it wouldn't have surprised me to be written out." He hated failure. Poirot moved to the small table near the fireplace and set the burnt scrap down. "Tell me, Monsieur, where were you after Carruthers left that night?" Teddy hesitated. "In my room. Upstairs. Alone?" "Yes." "Did you go down again?" "No." Poirot lifted a brow. "Then how did your muddy boots leave faint tracks in the hallway the next morning?" Teddy's eyes widened slightly. I went outside briefly, early, before. Everything For what purpose? He swallowed. To smoke. I didn't want Mrs. Lonsdale to see. Poirot tilted his head. So you do still smoke? Occasionally, when I can't sleep. Poirot gave a small nod. And that evening, you couldn't sleep? No. You heard nothing. Heard nothing. No, Teddy repeated. But this time his voice wavered. Poirot stepped closer. You did not hear your father arguing with someone, or the door closing, or the sound of the latch? Teddy looked down. I heard him talking. Late. Raised. Voice. I thought it was another phone call. Yet the phone was disconnected. Teddy looked up. I didn't know that. None, Poirot said gently. But you did know he was angry. You feared what he might do. Perhaps you came down to speak with him. I didn't. Poirot paused, then reached into his notebook and removed a small card. You are left-handed, monsieur. Teddy blinked. Yes. What does that have to do with anything? A partial print, left in the phone casing, from a left thumb. That could have been from anyone. It could. But Lydia Maythorne is right-handed. Carruthers, too. Mrs. Lonsdale does not enter the study, and your father, by all accounts, preferred pens with his right hand. Teddy took a step back. So you think I rigged the phone? That I killed him? Poirot raised a hand. I think, monsieur, that you were desperate. You found the new will. Perhaps you had an argument. Perhaps he told you that you were out for good. But I do not think you are a killer. Teddy sank into the armchair now, all energy draining from his frame. I found the will, he said softly. 3 nights ago. I was looking for his bank ledgers. He wanted me to calculate some property figures. I shifted the wrong book and found the compartment. I read it. Poirot waited. He gave everything away. Teddy went on. Even the cottage. Nothing for me. Nothing. And I thought, maybe the old one still counted. Maybe. If no one saw the new one, you tried to destroy it. He shook his head. I couldn't bring myself to. Not at first. I left it. But the next night, I couldn't sleep. I went back. I lit a fire. But when I opened the panel, it was gone. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Gone? Yes, someone had already taken it. Poirot stepped back. And so, you believed the original was still valid. That burning it would protect your place. Teddy nodded slowly. I wasn't thinking straight. I panicked. I thought if both wills were gone, they'd assume the last known version, the one I assumed favored me, would be used. Poirot folded his arms. And the phone. I didn't touch it, Teddy said, his voice steady now. I swear. I saw it was open, but I didn't know what it meant. I thought maybe he was repairing it. Poirot studied him for a long moment. You did not stage the ringing. No. Poirot turned and looked into the fire grate again. One were burned, one hidden. And someone who wanted the world to believe George Halversham died peacefully, locked away, unreachable. He turned back to Teddy. Tell me, monsieur, did your father have a spare key to the study? Yes, kept in the top drawer of the kitchen dresser. But he told Mrs. Lonsdale never to touch it. And did you? Teddy looked confused. No. Why? Poirot offered a small smile. Because someone did. And now I believe I know who. Chapter 9. The disappearing Keith kitchen of the Halversham house bore the quiet orderliness of Mrs. Lonsdale's steady hand. Copper pans hung from hooks above the stove. A row of polished canisters stood like sentinels on the shelf. The only sound was the faint ticking of a wall clock. Poirot stepped inside and moved directly to the dresser. He did not hesitate. He had been told where to look. Top drawer. He slid it open. Inside were rolls of twine, spare buttons, a pair of gloves, a box of matches, and near the back, a set of old brass keys on a worn leather ring. Poirot lifted them carefully, laying the ring on a clean cloth he removed from his pocket. He examined each key, his fingertips light. Most were labelled in faded ink: pantry, greenhouse, gate. One, however, was unlabelled. It was smooth, polished from handling, slightly bent near the shaft, as if it had been forced into a tight lock. Poirot turned it over once, then twice. Mrs. Lonsdale's voice sounded behind him. "I thought I heard someone come in." He turned. "Ah, madam, I trust you do not mind my curiosity." She smiled faintly. "You've looked in every other room. I don't see why the kitchen should be sacred." Poirot held up the key ring. "You keep these in order?" "Yes." Mr. Halversham insisted on it. "I'm the only one who touches that drawer." "Always?" Her smile faltered. "Well, almost. I suppose Teddy used to now and then, when he was younger. And George, well, he'd fumble through it when he forgot something." Poirot nodded. "And this key?" He held up the unlabelled one. "Do you know its purpose?" She frowned. "That's odd. That used to be the old study key. I thought it was thrown out." "Thrown out, yes, years ago. When the Halversham had the lock replaced, said the bolt was enough. He told me to discard the spare. I must have forgotten." Poirot held it to the light. "It's been used recently. I can see the wear, and the dust inside the drawer disturbed only around this key." She took a step forward. "I haven't touched it in years, but someone has," Poirot said softly. "Quite recently. Likely within the last 2 nights." Mrs. Lonsdale looked troubled. "Who would have even known it was there?" "That," Poirot said, "is the question." He returned the key to the cloth and folded it gently. "Do you recall if Lydia Maythorne ever entered the kitchen?" "Once or twice," she said slowly. "When she visited, she always brought biscuits in a tin, said they went well with her tea." Poirot gave a faint smile. "And the Reverend?" "Rarely. He drank tea like it was medicine. Said he preferred his own brand." Poirot's expression remained calm, but his mind sharpened. It was not Lydia. The prints on the phone casing didn't match, and the Reverend had no technical knowledge to rig a timed device. But someone had not only found the hidden will but known enough to remove the key, enter the study, lock it from the outside, and leave the illusion of isolation. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Poirot?" It was Mrs. Lonsdale again, hesitating near the door. "There's something I didn't tell you earlier." Poirot turned gently. "Go on, madam." I remembered something strange from the morning we found Ma Halversham." She twisted, her apron in her hands, "when I opened the door and saw him sitting there. I told you I heard the phone ring." "Yes?" "3 rings," Poirot said. She nodded. But what I didn't say was, I thought I heard a second sound, a scraping, just as I was opening the door. Faint, like metal against wood. Poirot's eyes brightened slightly. From where? Behind me. Toward the stairwell. Not inside the study. No, behind me. Poirot nodded slowly. See, madam, you are most helpful. He stepped past her, up the stairs, taking them two at a time. But silently, the upper landing was quiet. The hall stretched ahead, ending near Teddy's room. But that was not where Poirot turned. Instead, he moved toward a door at the other end, the small guest room used only occasionally. He opened it slowly. Inside, nothing seemed out of place. A tidy bed, a wardrobe, a chair by the window. But Poirot crossed directly to the wardrobe, opened it, and peered inside. Shoes. 5 pairs, all men's. 3 with hard leather soles. 1 pair, scuffed and pale workman's boots. And the 5th black Oxfords, lightly dusted with ash. Poirot bent down, brushed the side, a thin smear of soot. He reached inside and pulled out the right shoe. On the heel a small fiber, burned wool. He smiled, then turned abruptly as footsteps approached behind him. It was Inspector Graves. "You've been busy," the inspector said, arms folded. "We, Inspector. But now I believe the key has revealed its keeper." Graves glanced at the shoe Poirot held. "Whose are they?" "Not Lydia's," Poirot said simply. "And not the vicar's." Graves frowned. "Then whose?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "They belong," he said softly, "to someone who tried to erase a document. Misdirect suspicion and seal a door not with force, but with silence." He replaced the shoe and turned to the window, watching the first hint of dusk settle over the village. The murder, Inspector, was no crime of passion. It was rehearsed. Chapter 10. The man in the hall. Hercule Poirot did not sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his small rented room at the village inn, his hands neatly folded over a sheet of paper on which he had scribbled a single phrase: "Footsteps." In silence, he read it again, letting the weight of each word settle. In the case of George Halversham, nothing had been loud, not the crime, not the motive, not even the aftermath. It had been a silent performance, a murder dressed as natural. Death, a phone ringing from a disconnected line, a room locked without a key. And now, shoes with soot on the heel, tucked in a wardrobe rarely used. By morning, Poirot was already at the Halversham house again, pacing the front path when Inspector Graves approached, coat collar upturned against the wind. "You've got something more," Graves said, watching him carefully. "I have a picture forming," Poirot replied. "Not yet complete, but one that suggests the killer did not act alone, not in heart, at least." Graves frowned. "A conspiracy?" Poirot shook his head. "No. Mon ami, a single act, performed in solitude but shaped by years of resentment, of silence." He turned toward the house. "I must speak to Mrs. Lonsdale once more." They found her in the parlor, polishing silver with dutiful precision. "Madam," Poirot began gently, "I wish to ask about the man who used to visit your employer quietly and without announcement." She paused, then lowered her cloth. "You mean Mer Armitage?" Graves blinked. "Who's that?" "The estate solicitor," she said. George always called him for private matters. He'd come through the back, use the study for an hour, then leave. Poirot's eyes lit faintly. "When did you last see him?" "2 weeks before Mr. Halversham died." "Did he leave anything behind?" She frowned. "A folder, maybe? Slim, red. I dusted around it later. Poirot exchanged a glance with Graves. "It was not among the study documents when I searched." They left the parlour without another word. Back in the study, Poirot moved swiftly to the bookcase again, but this time not to the false panel. Instead, he examined the bottom shelf. One book had been replaced awkwardly, a slim volume titled Modern British Trust Law. It leaned slightly, as if returned in haste. Poirot pulled it free, and there, behind it, was a red folder. He laid it on the desk, opened it, and began to read. Inside, a copy of George's newly signed will, a note in George's hand, to be delivered by Lydia, should anything happen, and at the back, a sealed envelope. Poirot turned it over. On the front, in large, shaky writing, "To be opened in the presence of Inspector Graves only." Graves took it from him, broke the seal, and read dot as he reached the second page. His eyes narrowed. By the end, he looked up slowly. "Well," he said, "that changes things." Poirot nodded once. Graves held the letter against his chest. "It names someone. Directly. Says if he dies unexpectedly, we are to speak with this person at once. Not because George suspected them, but because he feared their desperation." Poirot walked to the window and looked out. Teddy stood at the far edge of the garden. "Head low." "Not him," Poirot murmured. "He is tangled in guilt, but not the thread that kills." Graves cleared his throat. "It names Douglas Finch." "Finch?" Poirot turned sharply. "Caretaker of the church," Graves explained. "Works with Crothers. Lives near the chapel. Was dismissed by George over a property dispute last year." Poirot's mind ran quickly. Finch had knowledge of the village, access to both the Halversham estate and the Vicarage. He would know the habits of all involved. And if Lydia had trusted him with the revised will, but he'd read it realized George was cutting out old allies. "Does Finch know about the phone?" Poirot asked. Graves nodded slowly. His father was a linesman. Finch used to repair the signal bell system in the vestry, built timers to alert Crothers when service was about to begin. Then he could easily construct the device. Poirot murmured, "And he'd have known where the spare key was, too." Graves added, "His wife worked here before Lonsdale." Poirot turned, his face now alight with certainty. And he would know to use Teddy as a convenient scapegoat. All he had to do was take the new will, hide it, trigger the illusion, and wait. Graves was already moving toward the door. "Let's pay Mr. Finch a visit." But Poirot held up a hand. "Not yet. Let us watch first. The man who acts in silence will not respond well to noise. But if he believes himself safe, he will return, perhaps, to remove the final piece." Graves looked at him. "You want to bait him?" Poirot's eyes glinted. "No, Inspector. I want to let him bait himself. That night, Poirot waited inside. The study, the curtains drawn, the lamp extinguished. Graves was hidden in the corridor. Wexley waited by the back entrance. At exactly 2 in the morning. The latch clicked. Poirot tensed. Soft steps moved across the hall, measured, confident. A silhouette appeared at the door. It paused. Poirot watched, breath still. A gloved hand reached forward and slid the bolt open from the outside. Poirot stepped into the light. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Finch." The man froze, his eyes wide. The silence broke. Chapter 11. A confession of quiet things. Douglas Finch did not flee. He stood motionless in the doorway, hands still on the bolt, as if by staying still he might remain unseen. But Hercule Poirot stepped forward, and behind him came Inspector Graves, calm and steady as a shadow. "Shut the door, please, Mer Finch," Graves said. "We'd rather not wake the household." Finch obeyed, slowly. The door clicked shut behind him. "I suppose," he said after a moment, "there's no point pretending I was just passing by." "No," Poirot said gently. "Not at this hour. Not with gloves in June." Finch looked older than his years, his thin frame hunched slightly, the lines around his eyes drawn deep, as though carved by old regret. "I didn't mean to kill him," he said. Poirot nodded, but said nothing. "I only wanted the will," Finch went on. "Just that. He wasn't supposed to die." Graves stepped beside him. "Start at the beginning." Finch let out a long breath. "Lydia asked me to keep the new will. George didn't want it with the solicitor until he was certain. Said he might change his mind again. So he gave it to her, asked her to deliver it only if anything happened. Lydia didn't want to be the messenger, so she passed it to me. I locked it away in my cupboard in the vestry." He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly small in the lamplight. "Then I heard whispers that George had changed it, that he was leaving money to the church. Lydia confirmed it. I couldn't believe it after what he did to me." "You were dismissed," Poirot said. Finch nodded. "After 22 years. He accused me of selling scrap from the rectory roof when it was his own builder who ordered it removed. But George wanted someone to blame. Always did." Graves's voice was low. "So you planned revenge?" "No," Finch said quickly. "Not revenge. Just balance. I thought if I took the new will and burned it, the old one would stand. Teddy would inherit, and Teddy would help me. He said he would, once he had the funds." Poirot folded his arms. "But you did more than burn a document, monsieur." Finch's hands twitched. "I went to the house late after Carruthers left. I knew the kitchen door. I'd fixed the latch once. It still didn't catch properly. I used the spare key from the top drawer still there, just like always. I unlocked the study. George was there, half asleep in the chair. I didn't even think he noticed me." "You took the will?" Graves asked. "Yes, from behind the shelf. I'd seen him hide things there before." Poirot's tone softened. But something changed. Finch's eyes flicked to the desk. He woke up, looked right at me, asked what I thought I was doing, and, panicked. I told him it was a mistake, that I'd come to warn him about a storm, anything I could think of. But he stood up, shouted, said he'd have me arrested, said I was stealing from him again. Poirot's voice was low, and your heart turned cold. Finch closed his eyes. No, no, I swear. I just wanted to leave. I told him I'd go, but he started to wheeze, clutching at his chest. He staggered and fell. He looked down. I didn't touch him. I didn't need to. Poirot glanced at Graves, who said nothing. I checked his pulse. Finch continued. It was weak, but steady. I thought I could still make it right. Hide the new will. Make it look like he died peacefully. If no one knew, it would be as if nothing had changed. And the phone? Poirot asked. Finch's lips tightened. I had a timer, a ringer device I built years ago for the church bells. Back when Carruthers had me announce special sermons. I'd adapted it once for a prank idea, and I used to laugh about it. I brought it with me, just in case. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I could delay someone finding the body long enough to be gone. He looked up. I'm not a killer, Monsieur Poirot. No, Poirot said quietly. But you are a coward. Finch's face flushed. He would have ruined me again. He was dying. Poirot snapped, voice sharp. Now, you could have helped. Call someone. Alerted the house. Instead, you watched him collapse and you walked away. Graves stepped forward. Where's the new will now? Finch slowly pulled a folded envelope from his coat. Here, I never destroyed it. I couldn't. Poirot took it, confirming the seal. Your guilt, he said softly, was greater than your anger. Graves placed a hand on Finch's shoulder. You'll have to come with me now. Finch did not resist. As they reached the door, he turned to Poirot once more. Do you think it matters now whether the phone rang or not? Poirot regarded him. It matters, monsieur, because a lie disguised as silence is still a lie. And you built an entire illusion around one ringing note. Graves opened the door, and together they stepped out into the early grey light of dawn. Poirot remained behind Dot in the quiet study, surrounded by cold books and the empty chair where a man had died. He touched the phone once more. Dot no longer a mystery, just a relic of manipulation. Dot, and at last silent. Chapter 12. A house rearranged mid-morning. The Halversham house was unnaturally quiet. Word of Douglas Finch's arrest had not yet reached the village. But inside the old walls of the house, every occupant seemed to move with careful deliberation, as if the air itself had thickened. Hercule Poirot stood in the sitting room, glancing once at the mantel clock before turning to Inspector Graves, who waited at the door. They are assembled, Poirot asked. Graves nodded. Everyone you asked for. Even Lydia returned this morning. "'Twas been," Poirot murmured. "Let us begin." They entered the drawing-room together. Lydia Maythorne sat near the window, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the carpet. Teddy stood by the fireplace, hands shoved deep into his pockets. Reverend Carruthers, in his collar and coat, sat straight-backed but pale. Mrs. Lonsdale hovered near the door, her face unreadable, but her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her apron. Poirot stepped into the center of the room and cleared his throat. "You must forgive this intrusion," he began, "but as is often the case, truth arrives not at the stroke of midnight, but just after breakfast. Teddy exhaled heavily. So it was Finch. Then, all along, Poirot raised a finger. Patience. Monsieur, the truth. She is delicate. She must be unwrapped like a letter, one line at a time. He walked slowly before them, eyes sweeping over each face. George Halversham was not a man of many friends. His temperament, by all accounts, was brisk, stern, but his affairs were meticulous. He had changed his will only weeks before his death, naming, among others, Lydia Maythorne as beneficiary. Lydia did not look up. This, Poirot continued, caused unrest. Not because Miss Maythorne was undeserving, on the contrary. She had remained loyal through years of indifference, but because others had expected more, chief among them his own son. Teddy flushed. I've told you already I didn't kill him. No, monsieur, Poirot said gently. You did not, but you did try to erase the new will, believing the old one would secure your future. A foolish action, but not a fatal one. Mrs. Lonsdale glanced at him, surprise in her eyes. Poirot pressed on. The true architect of the illusion was Douglas Finch. He had been entrusted with the new will, but, embittered by past grievances with George Halversham, sought to suppress it. When he entered the house late that evening, he intended only to retrieve the document. He looked to Carruthers, but something went wrong. George woke. There were words, and then his heart failed him. Carruthers's voice cracked slightly. So, he wasn't murdered. In the end, Poirot shook his head. Not by hand. No poison. No violence. His heart gave out. But it was what followed that turned a natural death into a tangled deception. He paused, then turned toward Lydia. You, mademoiselle, gave the will to Mr. Finch, did you not? Finally, she met his eyes. Yes, George told me to. He said I was the only one he trusted to keep it from falling into the wrong hands. Poirot inclined his head. And you gave it to Finch. Because he had access to the church's records cabinet, Lydia said. I thought it would be safe. And Finch, Poirot said, intended to destroy it, but lost his nerve. He staged the scene instead. He oiled the bolt, set the ringing phone, hid the new will, and then vanished, leaving the illusion of a man who had died alone, untouched. There was silence. Poirot let it settle. But there are two final pieces to consider, he said. Two things which made the truth clear. He walked to the writing desk and opened the drawer. First, he said, holding up a key. This retrieved from the top kitchen drawer. The old study key, thought discarded, was used to stage the locked room illusion. Mrs. Lonsdale frowned. But I hadn't touched that drawer in months. Indeed, madam, Poirot said. But Mr. Finch had. Quietly, with precision, he set the key down and moved to the hearth. And second these. He held up the shoes he had retrieved from the guest wardrobe, the pair with faint soot around the heel. The only item linking the fireplace where the first will was burned to someone other than the son. Graves took the shoes from him. Finch, Poirot concluded, used them when he entered late that night. He knew he couldn't wear his everyday boots, they'd be recognized. So he took these from the guest room, which no one had used in months. He returned them there. But soot, monsieur et madame's, it clings. Carruthers leaned forward. So Finch rigged the room to look untouched. And Teddy just got caught in the middle. Poirot nodded. Teddy's actions, though dishonest, were clumsy. No timing device, no bolted door. He lacked the skill and the nerve. Teddy exhaled shakily. I thought if no one saw the new will, Poirot gave a small smile. One may suppress a document, monsieur, but not a man's memory. He turned to Lydia. Your instincts, mademoiselle, were sound, but your trust was misplaced. She gave a faint, sad nod. Poirot's voice softened. Sometimes a man does not strike with a blade but with silence. That was Douglas Finch, and silence, Ms. Amos, is the most dangerous accomplice of all. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Mrs. Lonsdale, hands clasped, asked, What happens now? Poirot turned to Graves, who straightened. Mr. Finch will stand trial, the inspector said, for obstruction, tampering with a legal will, and for failing to render aid, but not for murder. The coroner's report will state heart failure. Carruthers gave a slight sigh. So the room wasn't haunted after all. Poirot's moustache twitched. Only by guilt, mon ami. He turned toward the door, his task complete. Outside, the morning sun had finally begun to rise above the hedge, casting sharp shadows against the gravel path, and for the first time in days, the Halversham house felt honest. Chapter 13. The final note of air in the study had changed. It was no longer thick with questions or quiet accusations. The storm had passed, yet Hercule Poirot lingered not out of indecision, but out of instinct. Some threads in a tapestry, he knew, must be tugged even after the image had fully revealed itself. He stood alone at George Halversham's desk. The others had dispersed. Graves had left to file his final report. Lydia had withdrawn to the garden, unreadable behind her sunglasses. Teddy had vanished to the orchard. Mrs. Lonsdale had returned to her routines with silent relief. Poirot, however, remained. The drawers of the desk had been thoroughly searched before. Yet, as he ran his fingers lightly along the inner panel of the uppermost drawer, he noticed something, a groove, a faint seam barely visible to the eye. He pressed against the back. A soft click. A hidden compartment slid open with a quiet breath of stale air. Inside, a single folded page, yellowed with age and bound by a simple red ribbon. Poirot drew it out carefully and unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. George Halversham's, sharp, firm, but fraying slightly at the edges. It was dated 18 months prior, to be opened only in the event of my death and only by the one who truly understands why I've lived the way I have. If that is you, then perhaps you have already solved the greater puzzle. There is something I never told Lydia, something I never told Teddy, and perhaps I never had the courage to face it myself. I loved once, desperately, but she left, not by choice but by fate, and all that remained of her was a letter and a child. Teddy was not hers, but Lydia was. Poirot stopped. The words shimmered slightly before him. He read on. I was ashamed, not of her, but of how I'd treated her, pushing her away, fearing gossip, fearing judgment. She came here in service, and I dismissed her with coin, never admitting the truth. But I watched Lydia grow. She stayed in the village, took work wherever she could. And though I never called her my own, I made arrangements behind her back, funding for her education, letters to vouch for her employment. When I fell ill last year, I decided enough. She would have what was hers, not as charity, but as justice. If she learns this after I am gone, so be it. Perhaps it is best. But I hope she understands. I am sorry, and I am proud. George Halversham read it again, slowly, as if testing. The ink for truth, a note not meant for courtrooms, not for inspectors, but for those who needed to know. He folded it once more and slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. He stepped out into the hall and, after a moment's pause, crossed to the garden. Lydia was seated on the stone bench near the fountain, her eyes fixed on the trickle of water cascading from the lion's mouth. Poirot approached gently. "Mademoiselle," he said, "may I sit?" She nodded, wordlessly. They sat in silence for a moment, the breeze stirring the leaves above. Poirot cleared his throat softly. "Did you love him?" She blinked. "Who?" "George Halversham." She didn't speak immediately. Then, "I don't know. There were days I hated him, days I pitied him. But then, he gave me work when no one else would. Never said much. But he trusted me with his books, his estate, more than he trusted his own son." Poirot nodded. "He loved you in his way," he said. She smiled faintly. "In his way, yes. That sounds like George." Poirot reached into his coat and held out the folded letter. "I believe this was meant for you." She stared at it. "What is it?" "Something left behind. Something not legal, not binding, but true." She took it hesitantly. He stood. "I will leave you to read it." He turned and walked back toward the house, the gravel crunching softly beneath his shoes. Behind him, the fountain continued its slow, rhythmic trickle. Half an hour later, Lydia entered the study. Her eyes were red but steady. "You knew," she said. Poirot turned from the window. "I suspected. I always wondered," she said, voice low, "why I stayed. Why he let me. Why he paid for a tutor without asking. Why he left me the cottage." Poirot said nothing. She looked down at the desk. "I hated him, you know, for the way he treated Teddy, for the way he hid behind ledgers and silence. But now," she gave a weak laugh, "now I'm more confused than ever." Poirot stepped toward her. "Mademoiselle, love and shame, they are not opposites. Sometimes they sit quietly together, neither daring to speak." She looked up at him. "What should I do?" He smiled. "You must decide, madam, whether to remain Lydia Maythorne or to claim the name that was always yours in spirit, if not in law." She held the letter close. "I think," she said, "I'll sit with it for a while longer." Poirot nodded. Then, quietly, he took his leave. As he stepped out into the village lane, suitcase in hand. The clouds broke at last. A sliver of sun painted the rooftops in gold. Poirot glanced back at the Halversham house. It no longer looked cold. Just old. And perhaps finally at peace. Chapter 14. Echoes from the Vicarage church bells struck noon as Hercule Poirot made his way up the gravel path toward the vicarage. The village had returned to its usual pace, slow, deliberate, and half-curious. From a distance, one might never guess that a deception so quiet had recently shaken its stillness. Poirot reached the vicarage door and knocked, gently, with 2 knuckles. Moments later, it opened. Reverend Carruthers stood there, his robe slightly askew, a teacup in one hand, a puzzled look in the other. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, stepping aside. "I thought you'd left." "Not quite yet," Poirot replied. "I have one more loose thread to examine, and I believe you, Monsieur le Vicaire, may hold it." Carruthers raised an eyebrow but gestured. Him inside, the sitting room was modest, with a faint smell of old pages and wood polish. Books lay in small towers on every surface, as if someone had intended to tidy them, but lost heart halfway through. Poirot declined the offer of tea and instead took the seat by the hearth. Carruthers lowered himself opposite, folding his hands carefully. "So, what thread remains?" Poirot looked at him directly. "The phone." Carruthers tilted his head. "The one in the study." Poirot nodded. You see, monsieur, something has continued to trouble me." Finch set up a timer to ring the phone as a decoy. "That much we know. But Mrs. Lonsdale reported hearing the bell ring 3 times that morning. And yet," he paused, "there was no one near the phone at the time. Finch was long gone. Teddy was still asleep. Lydia and the Reverend were walking from opposite sides of the garden. The phone rang, as if cued. Carruthers waited. Poirot continued, "And yet, Reverend, it was you who found the phone disconnected after the fact." Carruthers nodded slowly. "Yes, I touched it only after you'd examined the desk. But you noticed the wire was loose. A mere observation." Poirot leaned forward. "Monsieur le Vicaire, I have no doubt about Finch's actions. But the timing of the ringing exactly as Mrs. Lonsdale approached the door is too precise. It did not serve Finch's escape. He was already gone. So who activated the ring?" Carruthers's expression darkened slightly, like a cloud drawing over his otherwise composed face. Poirot's voice dropped. "It was you, was it not?" The vicar inhaled slowly, then set his teacup down with a faint clink. "I did not know he was dead," he said, "only that something was amiss. I saw the door bolted. I heard voices that night, one angry, one quiet, and in the morning I passed the window and saw him in the chair." He clasped his hands tightly. "I thought he might have finally lost his mind. Or worse, passed out drunk." Poirot's brow twitched. "So you triggered the ring to draw attention?" Carruthers gave a slow nod. "Yes, I had built the timer mechanism with Finch years ago, in the vestry, for fun, really. I found the old bell box in the chapel's cupboard a few weeks before, and realized it was gone again, just after George died, and you suspected Finch of something. Not murder, just meddling. But I feared scandal. The church had suffered enough rumor." Poirot leaned back, arms crossed. "So you timed the phone to ring at a precise moment just before Mrs. Lonsdale approached, hoping someone would notice. I thought the sound might shake someone from inaction. That if George was still alive, someone would knock, or enter, that the illusion would collapse. Poirot was silent a moment. And did you ever open the door yourself? Carruthers looked down. No, I could not bring myself to do it. Poirot sighed. You let others walk into the mystery while you stood just outside of it. Carruthers winced at the truth. Do you think that makes me complicit? Poirot tilted his head. No, monsieur, but it does make you a mirror of George Halversham, himself watching, observing, and choosing silence when the moment called for courage. The vicar looked up, startled. Poirot rose. Silence, Reverend, has been the loudest accomplice in this affair, from George's hidden past, to Lydia's inheritance, to your own hesitations, and, as I said before, it is always the silence that kills, not always the hand. Carruthers stood as well, his posture more upright than before. Will you tell the authorities? There is no crime in caution, Poirot said, only in concealment. You did not stage a murder. You merely rang a bell that needed ringing. He moved toward the door, then paused. There is one favor I ask, however. Carruthers nodded. Anything. Write to Lydia. Poirot said softly, not as a priest, but as a man who knew the truth before she did. Tell her what George could not, and tell her that faith sometimes hides in quiet corners. Carruthers looked down, his throat tightening. Yes, I will. Poirot stepped into the corridor. And, monsieur, he added, turning once more, perhaps next time, knock on the door yourself. Outside, the bells had fallen silent again. Poirot walked slowly down the lane, cane tapping lightly on the earth, his mind at rest. A quiet case, he thought, a ringing phone, a bolted door, a family rearranged like furniture in an old house, not torn apart, just turned slightly toward the light. Chapter 15. The door left open. The day of Hercule Poirot's departure arrived with little fanfare. He packed his valise with slow, methodical care, folding his garments with symmetrical precision. Outside the window, the village continued its quiet rhythm, children chasing a ball down the lane, a farmer's cart rattling over the stones, and the distant sound of church bells soft this time, not urgent. He adjusted his cravat in the mirror, gave his mustache one final, approving twist, and descended the stairs of the Rose Briar Inn. Mrs. Weaver, the innkeeper, handed him a packed lunch wrapped in brown paper for the road. She said, somewhat shyly, "It's just cheese and pickle. But, well, you've been kind." Poirot bowed slightly. "Madam, your hospitality has been most agreeable. A quiet inn for a very noisy puzzle." He had just reached the door when it opened abruptly from the other side. Teddy Halversham stood there, breathless, hair tousled, tie crooked. He looked like a man who had wrestled with himself the entire night and lost. Poirot took a half-step back. "Monsieur Halversham," he said mildly, "is something the matter?" Teddy didn't speak for a moment. Then, "Can I walk with you?" Poirot inclined his head. Of course. They began walking side by side down the narrow lane, past the hedges and overgrown walls of the village cottages. The sky overhead was pale and clean. For a while, they walked in silence. "I came to say thank you," Teddy said eventually, "and to ask something." Poirot said nothing, only glanced at him. I've been thinking, since everything happened, about what Finch did, about what I did." He stopped suddenly, turning toward Poirot. "I tried to hide the will. I thought, if Lydia didn't get the estate, I might. That somehow it was owed to me." Poirot waited. "I never really loved him, you know," Teddy continued. "My father. He didn't make it easy. But I wanted him to respect me, just once. I thought if I inherited, it would prove something. That I'd won." Poirot's gaze was steady. "But you felt no triumph when you read the will." "No," Teddy said bitterly. "Just shame." He kicked a small stone off the path. "I hated her for years, Lydia. She was always there, always watching, quiet and capable. She was everything he admired, and she didn't even ask for it. While I had to ask for everything, and still got nothing." Poirot's voice was quiet. "And now," Teddy exhaled, "now I know why he left it to her. Why he couldn't tell me, and why it doesn't matter anymore." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "The solicitor delivered this to me this morning. George's last amendment to the will. Even with the tampering, it's valid. Lydia inherits the house and estate. I get a small portion of trust." Poirot nodded. "He did not abandon you, monsieur. He merely saw the future more clearly than the past. I hated him for what he didn't give me." Teddy said, "Now I think I'll hate him for what he tried to give too late." Poirot stopped walking and turned to him fully. "You are not alone in that. Many people perhaps most miss the moment to say what matters. George Halversham was no worse than the rest, only quieter." Teddy looked at him. "Do you think he regretted it? Not telling me? Not telling her?" Poirot considered. "Regret, monsieur, is not always shouted. Sometimes it is left behind like a letter in a drawer, unsent, but written nonetheless." Teddy nodded slowly. "I've decided to leave," he said. "Not forever, but for a while. There's a farm up north, old friend of mine runs it. I'll work with my hands, earn my own name." Poirot gave a small smile. "Perhaps you will also earn your peace." They resumed walking, reaching the small stone bridge that marked the edge of the village. Poirot paused there, setting his valise down and taking in the scene one last time. The tall hedges, the distant thatched roofs, the sharp sparkle of sunlight on slate. Teddy looked out across the fields. "She never locked the study door," he said suddenly. "I asked Mrs. Lonsdale. She said George never insisted on it, said there was no need." Poirot turned to him, eyes thoughtful. "And yet, when you found it that morning, it was bolted." Teddy nodded. Poirot let the silence settle again. "Sometimes," he said, "a man bolts a door not to keep others out but to stop himself from calling them in." Teddy blinked. "You think George locked it himself?" Poirot shrugged gently. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the door was never truly locked at all, only closed in the right light, seen from the wrong angle." Teddy gave a slow, half smile. "Still, full of riddles, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot picked up his case. "Not riddles, monsieur, just truths wearing hats." They shook hands, a firm, brief grasp. Then Teddy turned back toward the village, his figure growing smaller with each step. Poirot stood alone for a moment, then stepped onto the road leading to the station. his shoes clicking rhythmically on the stone. And as he walked, he thought not of Finch, nor the ringing phone, nor the will. He thought of Lydia Maythorne, of her sitting quietly with her letter, of Teddy Halversham, who had left his inheritance behind for something far greater, and of George Halversham, who, in death, had done the one thing he never managed in life. He had finally opened a door.